Hello, Internet. It's always this awkward beginning of these things when nobody's listening and I'm waiting for people to tune in, but I'll just stop waiting and I'll just talk because people will be listening to this after the fact too in podcast form. Speaking of which, you can download this in podcast form at soon after it's done at Patreon, at Substack, and also at davidrovics.com/thisweek, where you can find various other spoken and sung broadcasts. And I have been feeling pretty dejected about genocide and other horrible developments on planet Earth, and I know a lot of other people are feeling that way too. And given that we don't seem to be able to stop it from happening right away, I thought I'd do a broadcast about rebel songs, about rebellions, about the resistance. Because basically I was just thinking this morning as I was planning this broadcast, which was a very unplanned affair, just because my family was leaving me for the day, and I thought I should do something. So I thought I'll do a broadcast. And then I thought, well, what I really should do is songs about actual resistance, not just the usual songs that I do about people who died. You know, I often say my songs have a high death toll, and that's okay. But it's, I think, good to actually focus on actual, it's successful resistance. And I say I'll put successful with a little, a little asterisk, because rebellions don't usually lead to revolutions. But they do usually lead to big changes, and then, of course, armed rebellions are only one very important way that things have changed in history, recent and further back around the world. But then there's also all sorts of other forms of resistance that have made a real impact on all kinds of different societies, including mass civil disobedience and even actions undertaken by small groups of people and even individuals, which have historically actually made a big difference in all kinds of different settings and societies, and as history unfolded in various different places. So there's your overview for what I'm doing here. I have a handwritten list of songs, which is all songs about on this general subject, and I'll make them into a playlist of resistance songs on SoundCloud eventually. And this will probably be one of many similar sessions on this subject, because I've actually written a lot of songs about this, although I've never put them together in any form, actually, for some reason. But I will just more or less randomly and I can see your comments, by the way, so thanks. I love seeing comments, and if there's anything in particular that seems relevant for responding to or putting up on the screen or something, just will. And but I'll start this little first of a series of broadcasts about songs related more pretty much directly to resistance of various kinds, with a little song about 1831 in Wales. The first use of the red flag as a symbol of revolution was apparently in Wales in 1831, and the Merthyr uprising, which was put down by Scottish Highlander troops in true colonial fashion, was a seminal event, the last armed uprising on the island of Great Britain, and it was an event that very much helped sort of midwife the birth of the Welsh, English, and Scottish trade union councils, which formed 3 years later and were basically the foundation of what would eventually become a powerful British labor movement. 1831, the age of industry begun. For the working folk of Wales, life was short. With wages cut again, it was only sensible that then folks took over, shut down the debtors' court. The gentry pulled the wire, told their men to open fire and restore the rule of their estate. But as the night descended and the battle ended, the soldiers had all fled behind the gate. They chanted cheese and bread, and our children must be fed in the days when Wales rose against the crown. They chanted cheese and bread with a bloody loaf above their heads when the red flag flew in Merthyr town. The message went out east and west to put the gentry to the test. The cavalry was ambushed and turned back. After so long playing defense, the time had come now when the workers were the ones on the attack. They chanted cheese and bread, and our children must be fed in the days when Wales rose against the crown. They chanted cheese and bread with a bloody loaf above their heads when the red flag flew in Merthyr town. Sent soldiers by the score till order was restored. Then came Dick Penderyn's execution, another martyr for the cause, meant to give us pause the next time people call for revolution. They chanted cheese and bread, and our children must be fed in the days when Wales rose against the crown. They chanted cheese and bread with a bloody loaf above their heads when the red flag flew in Merthyr town. And that is going to be on my upcoming album with the band in France that I was recording with last month. Whenever the album's out, I'm not sure, but that'll be on it. And this next one will be as well. And it is a decidedly punk rock rendition that you'll be hearing. And in the 1840s, the 1840s has been coming up a lot recently for history buffs who are fond of making comparisons between the present and the past. One of those comparisons that people have been making have been around other famines that have been imposed by outside forces. BBC is actually currently doing, one of the strange things about BBC is their historical documentaries can be really good even while their coverage of the current events is more wanting. But they have an excellent series that they're doing right now called The 3 Million about the Bengal famine during the Second World War, which was entirely the fault of the British colonial authorities in India. And the British colonial authorities were directly responsible for other famines, including the famine in Ireland in the 1840s. Although at least with the famine in Ireland, as well as the hunger that was throughout Europe for the working class and the peasantry, in the 1840s in Ireland, it led to famine, and the reason is because of British government policies. Although there was a potato blight throughout Europe, and it was causing all kinds of problems, and it was also leading to all kinds of rebellions, including the rebellions of 1848, which overthrew every monarchy in Europe, with the exceptions of Russia and England. But mostly they came back to power, but in a very changed form. And in the United States, there were also rebellions going on that were very much around the same kinds of questions of land and freedom, and which is always what it's about. And in upstate New York, and incidentally, I'm going to New York in a couple of days. Me and my family on Tuesday head to the Northeast, and I'll be doing gigs in Woodstock, New York, and also Boston and Amherst, Massachusetts, and New Haven, Connecticut, and possibly others. And but that's what's definite coming up at davidrovics.com/tour. You can see those details if you're around there or know anybody who is. But anyway, in upstate New York in the 1840s, there was when the rent went up on the tenant farmers, and yes, most farmers were tenant farmers back then. It's a concept that a lot of people aren't even familiar with today, thankfully, although in much of the world it's very common still today. And but the tenant farmers of upstate New York had their essentially rent went up massively all of a sudden, and they organized a rent strike, and it went on for 9 years, and it transformed the society in all kinds of ways. Although today it would be hard to tell, but for a while it made a difference. Led directly to the Homestead Act, which was not good for a lot of people, but was good for a lot of others, including a lot of working class folks. So this song's called Landlord. The patroons came from Holland to America, became landlords where none had been before. Soon one man owned 500,000 acres on both sides of the Hudson River shore. He invited families to move in and give him 30% of everything they grew every year. This is how they'd pay the rent. His name was Van Rensselaer. He became one of the richest men on earth. In today's terms, $90 billion is how much he'd be worth. All this for doing nothing but saying all of this was his. I have the power of the state behind me, and I'm in the landlord biz. After 200 years of this and one revolution won, another Van Rensselaer had another son, and this Rensselaer was greedier than his ancestors dead and past. It was now the 1840s, and things were changing fast. It was the straw that broke the back. The bottle was uncorked. They started organizing meetings, the tenant farmers of New York. They found the strength of numbers. They found the power of suggestion. They found each other asking the same question. Who gave you the right to be a landlord? To live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay so we can work this soil? They vowed they would stop the rent collection. They vowed they'd bring this madness to an end. And when one blew the tin horn of distress, they soon found they had 1,000 friends, dressed in calico skirts with masks upon their faces, on horseback armed with knives and guns. They chanted and they yelled. They kept their farms and they kept the sheriffs on the run. They asked, who gave you the right to be a landlord, to live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? The governor's militias tried to stop them, but nothing could be done to break their will. And by 1848, the landlords buckled, sold their holdings to the farmers in the hills. Yes, they overthrew this feudal system, but it's replaced now by speculators and banks. And you can still hear the homeless families asking, the landed gentry in our ranks, who gave you the right to be a landlord, to live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? Who gave you the right to be a landlord, to live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? Who gave you the right? I was recently hanging out with somebody at a party who was friends with the marine toxicologist Ricky Ott, who wrote a wonderful book called Not One Drop about the blockade of Prince William Sound, well, about the Valdez oil spill in the 80s in Alaska, the Exxon Valdez ship that spilled oil, and the consequences for the people and for the fish and the environment, and it was a terrible thing, this oil spill. But what transpired afterwards, specifically 4 years afterwards, when the fisher people of Cordova and elsewhere in the region realized that the herring run was not going to be coming back as a result of the oil. They wanted justice. They wanted compensation. They wanted a lot more than that. They wanted to know why the government didn't seem to have any real data on just how toxic oil was, when it was obviously extremely toxic. And as a result of their blockade, the U.S. government spent $1 billion researching the toxicity of oil after that. A song called Cordova. I am a fisherman, so were my parents. Here in Cordova, on Prince William Sound, I'm not a tree hugger, but I love the mountains. And hauling in the gill net with the ocean all around, life was good here. You could raise a family with 100,000 tons of herring set out every year. 1989. The tanker grounded. Nothing's ever been the same around here. Senator Stevens said, not one drop of oil would spill on Alaska's shores, and if it happened, it would be cleaned up but our beaches were still covered, as was the ocean floor. 4 years passed, each run collapsed. It was then we knew for sure the herring weren't coming back. Exxon's promises of compensation were about as empty as a used-up paper sack. It was August 20th, 1993, when we fishermen decided something must be done. We packed some groceries, we made some banners. We headed out to Valdez Narrows beneath the midnight sun. 100 vessels took to the water, pushed through a storm and to the Valdez Sea. We lined up our boats, formed a blockade, and we waited for whatever might be. A tanker was approaching. It was a sight to see there in the twilight of the day. We saw it turning. We all cheered and cried as tanker after tanker after tanker turned away. A Coast Guard gunship from Seattle would take 3 days to get up to the Sound. We held the line till then we went back home to Cordova, to this hallowed oiled ground. I am a fisherman, so were my parents, here in Cordova on Prince William Sound. I'll do a song about another sea-related event. This is not so much about a social movement as about another action taken not by a small group or a social movement or an individual, but taken by the leader of one of the world's biggest empires at the time. And it's history that is very, very, very much goes against every aspect of the Hasbara troll narrative that you can find flooding social media these days. The narrative that says Muslims are scary and dangerous, and you know, there's a sort of and Christians are a lot friendlier. And the historical reality is completely the opposite of that. Most notably, in 1492, when Spain came under Christian, Catholic rule completely, I think for the first time in 800 years or whatever, and the Jews and Muslims were given, I think first the Jews and then the Muslims were given a certain amount of time to leave the country or face horrible consequences like death. And so the Ottoman Navy, the Sultan sent the Ottoman Navy to Spain to rescue the Jews of Spain. 800,000 is the estimated number of people that were rescued. In 1492, Colombo crossed the ocean, only one of many horrors that would then be set in motion as his men cut limbs of Arawaks and burned children at the stake, plundering a continent for God's sake. In 1492, when King Ferdinand won Granada. He passed a law known as the Edict of Alhambra. It was as the landlords wanted, as his gracious God had willed, that any Jew in Spain had 3 months to leave or else be killed. And 800,000 Europeans became refugees and headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1492, they were starving and bereft. The king said they'd be safe up until the time they left. But Christian Europeans cut them open with their swords, searched their stomachs for gold, and dumped them overboard. And 800,000 Europeans became refugees and headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1492, the Sultan sent his fleet to go rescue Sephardim after the Andalus defeat. Hundreds of thousands of people who knew their deaths were near were rescued by Muslims and taken to Izmir. In 1492, the Sultan said that's fine if they'd impoverish their kingdom just to enrich mine. The Sultan also passed an edict. He said, welcome home. Now treat your new neighbors as if they were your own. And 800,000 Europeans became refugees and headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. And headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1492, and let's do one for another particular form of relatively small groups of people having a disproportionately large impact given their numbers. Have been events taking place in England and Scotland over the past several years, or 3 years, I guess, involving the company Elbit Systems and UAV Systems and other related arms manufacturers and weapons manufacturers that export largely to the Israeli military, which is, of course, actually illegal under British and international law, given that Israel is constantly violating all kinds of laws, international and otherwise, that should actually prohibit the export of arms to Israel from Britain. But, of course, the British government, the courts tend to look the other way until they're challenged. And then when they are challenged, things often don't go Elbit Systems' way. And many activists, actionists, as they call themselves, have been found innocent of any wrongdoing, even after causing millions of dollars worth of damage to all sorts of equipment at these factories that they go in smashing their way through. And lately there have been some people found guilty and facing all sorts of prison sentences. And I encourage you to go to PalestineAction.org and find out what are the court cases going on now and who needs support in the course of these prosecutions against Palestine actionists. I used to see them a lot on Instagram, but apparently Instagram just passed a new a regulation that political content is throttled unless you say somewhere on Instagram that you want political content. So that's really alarming. And this is a song about events that have been taking place in England and Scotland, and I will just pause momentarily before singing the song to mention to people in England or Scotland or Wales or Ireland that I will be coming back there in March of 2025. I know that's a long way off, but next year, this time, I will be there, and I already got a booking in London, and I'm very open to more. And while we're talking about touring, for those of you who live in the Northeast, in Boston, New York, New Haven, I will be there in this coming weekend, leaving in 2 days with my family to go to the East Coast. I'll be playing in Boston, Amherst, Massachusetts, and in New Haven, Connecticut, and Woodstock, New York, and maybe elsewhere. And then for those of you on the West Coast, I'll be doing gigs in Oregon at the end of May, and in California in August, traveling down the coast in August, doing gigs at backyard concerts in Northern California, and also, what did I mention? Australia. In late June, July, I'll be in Australia, playing gigs there. And November, Scandinavia. So if you're from any of those places, I'd love to hear from you about doing gigs, because there's loads of room free for gigs in all those areas, other than the Northeast, which is pretty filled up, coming up this week. But all those other areas that are further off, I have loads of space for more gigs. And I'd love to hear from people about that. So, non-commercial announcement over, and I will now do a song up for Palestine Action, in tune with the right chords. Protests were going on. They were going on for years. And then Palestine Action started smashing up the gears. And that's when the people got up off of their seats, took their families into town and blockaded the streets. For 3 days and nights you could hear the hammers swing, though no one knew for sure what the future might bring. They knew one thing for certain: these weapons of war must not be sent to the ports they're heading for. So this is a note to Elbit Systems: you will be shut down when the sledgehammers of justice come to town. After smashing up equipment and smashing a whole bunch, a lot of folks began developing a hunch. The cops took 3 full days to send anyone inside, and after 15 hours, they let the charges slide. It seems the prosecutors understood the climb. British companies aiding and abetting war crimes. The factory in Oldham had to close its gate, and the muralists in Palestine said that's smashing great. So this is a note to Elbit Systems: you will be shut down when the sledgehammers of justice come to town. All around the country, hammers being swung, showing civil disobedience is stronger than the tongue. taking action here so the weapons go nowhere, so they don't get sent to the IOF, 'cause we know what they'll do there. And so does the Prime Minister and the men who he supports, selling weapons to war criminals who don't want to go to court, who don't want to face the facts of what they've done, where the bullets go when they're fired from the guns. So this is a note to Elbit Systems: you will be shut down when the sledgehammers of justice come to town. So this is a note to Elbit Systems: you will be shut down when the sledgehammers of justice come to town. When the sledgehammers of justice come to town. Unadikum, 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 unadikum. There's forms of resistance that are extremely dangerous and costly, and may or may not work depending on the situation. That probably applies to every different possible form of resistance, in fact. But as people are aware who know anything about recent Palestinian history in the past few years, you know about the Great March of Return in Gaza and the many, many thousands of people that were involved with peaceful protests every Friday on the wall, on the fence between Gaza and Israel, calling for the siege to be lifted and for people to be allowed to eat and drink clean water and repair their homes and other things that they hadn't been able to do for many, many years because of Israel's policies of keeping their walled-off ghetto a walled-off ghetto. And people marched to the border fence there every Friday, and every Friday they were massacred for being there. And there are many, many thousands of people in Gaza because of those massacres who survived being shot and are now paralyzed, or they don't have eyes because the Israeli snipers were aiming for their eyes. But then other times, the same kind of nonviolent, very high stakes kind of tactic of just standing your ground and doing it like that. In other cases, with a less fascistic foe than the Israelis, it works and can change whole societies with this kind of sentiment. And this is a song about what happened on December 21st, 2015 on the Kenya-Somalia border. It's a long way from Nairobi. Travel across the country to an arid northern little border town. If you leave early in the day, you'll still be on your way long after the sun is going down. It began as just a ride to the other side, but then was interrupted by the sound of the shattering of glass as the driver tried to pass the men with guns there on the dusty desert ground. There were two already dead, another shot as she fled. No question here whose lives were now at stake. When all is said and done, it is instances like this one, when every move is one that just might make or break. All passengers get out, men with guns began to shout, "You Christians now get up against the wall." But then everyone stayed still, saying, "Now do as you will, you may leave, or you may kill us all." Wasn't far away, just over a year ago today, when people were massacred exactly in this manner. The pattern, it was clear. All the Muslims here would be safe if they just stood beside this banner. Headscarves passed from hand to hand among this human band. Live together or together fall. And then nobody moved, showing each of them approved of saying, "You may leave, or you may kill us all." Wasn't set in stone, there's no way they could have known that this time, this act of solidarity would see the gunmen leave. Goals left unachieved on the border there in Mandara County. But sometimes you take a chance, then at a second glance, you see you've changed the world with the passing of a shawl. There are those who will remember, those who on one day in December said, "You may leave, or you may kill us all. You may leave, or you may kill us all. You may leave." And of course, the most compelling, perhaps, and most clear and unequivocal form of solidarity that can possibly be offered, other than actually somehow getting directly Israel to lift the siege and stop the bombing, is what Ansar Allah is doing, and which is armed resistance against fascism, armed resistance against genocide. And they are probably having more impact than anything anybody else is doing. And that's not surprising. Half the world's trade passes by here. So much of it goes through Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, in the port of Gaza, no ships can arrive and not a boat can leave. While every day hundreds are dying beneath the rain of missiles fired from the air. Millions of starving Palestinians on the run and being slaughtered everywhere. No safe place in the Gaza Strip. No armies coming to defend. While all over the planet, people are asking, when will this savage bombing end? How many more thousands of children can be killed while we stand by? How can we just live our lives while we watch the babies die? Shukran jazilan to the Houthi army, standing for the conscience of us all, when they say no business as usual, while the bombs continue to fall. For a country that doesn't have an air force, they're painted black, red, green, and white. On the helicopters they use to board the ships to show their cause is right. The president says this terrorism must stop
right away. To which the Houthis respond, yes, that's exactly what we are trying to say. Shukran jazilan to the Houthi army, standing for the conscience of us all, when they say no business as usual, while the bombs continue to fall. Ships are going all the way around Africa to avoid the Houthi net. If Israel wants trading partners now, they might be just a little harder to get. We can blockade ports all over, north, south, east, and west. But the Houthi army are the ones who are no doubt blocking the traffic the best. Shukran jazilan to the Houthi army, standing for the conscience of us all, when they say no business as usual, while the bombs continue to fall.
It is not a coincidence that we hear so much about Ireland in the context of the protests against the genocide in Gaza, and it's been happening for a very long time. This deep connection between the Palestinian people and the Irish people, and specifically in terms of understanding and opposing occupation of your land and people, the understanding of land and freedom and what it means in the context of being occupied. And there's so many parallels, although certainly what is being done to Gaza has few parallels in recent history. The savagery and incredible amount of bombs being used, and the totality of the famine. It's all very nothing like what we've seen in this world for a very long time. Despite the fact that there are other horrible things happening right now at the same time, there's nothing quite like Gaza, and there hasn't been for a very long time. But there are lots of relevant parallels, though, and comparisons and similarities, and one of the things that we hear a lot about with Gaza and with Israel, and this conflict of the Israeli military's conflict with the people of Gaza, which is what we're talking about here. That's what we're looking at when they call it when the media calls this a war between Israel and Hamas. What they're doing is engaging in Holocaust denial, and I think it's a very important point to make. This is a form of Holocaust denial. To call this war a war between Israel and Hamas is a form of Holocaust denial. It's not a war between Israel and Hamas. It's obvious to anybody who's been looking at what's been happening there for the past several months. This is a war of Israeli military against the people of Gaza. It is a war against the people in response to a people's war. It's the same kind of tactic that the U.S. used in Vietnam against the Vietnamese people, just killing them, for existing. This is what's happening. It's a genocide. To not acknowledge that is to deny a genocide. It is a form of Holocaust denial. That's what's going on. That's what we're seeing in the Western media, is Holocaust denial every day. And that's what we're seeing from the Western leaders, is Holocaust denial, including many of the ones calling for a ceasefire, who are not calling this Holocaust or calling it a genocide or calling it what it is, which is Israel engaging in the mass starvation intentionally and completely unnecessarily of an entire population, mostly children. And but uh, the Irish people refer to the Holocaust of the 1840s, which was in so many similar ways an intentional killing of millions of people, intentionally not saving the lives of millions of people because your government changed its policy. I mean, it's as clear as night and day for those who aren't familiar with the history. There was a government right in the middle of the potato blight. There was an election in England, and a different party came to power, and the party that came to power in the middle of the potato blight no longer believed in keeping the Irish people alive, and so they just stopped. They stopped with the arrangements that had existed prior to that, which I don't need to get into the details, but it was a government change and change in policy that directly resulted in the famine. But more recently than the Irish famine, looking at the 1970s, when we talk about these prisoners and hostages in Gaza and Israel, thousands and thousands of children being held in Israeli prisons indefinitely without charge, along with adults. This whole thing of the difference, whatever the difference is supposed to be between a hostage and a prisoner, I mean, it is completely superficial. There is no difference. The way Israel takes prisoners, there's no difference. They are just randomly selected, and that is no exaggeration. They just randomly select people from the West Bank to imprison. And they hold them with no charges indefinitely, and they can renew their sentence every 6 months and just keep them there forever, with no trial, no charges, nothing. That's exactly what that was the UK's policy in their occupation of Northern Ireland, of the occupied 6 counties of the north of Ireland. That was their policy, indefinite detention without trial, in the early 1970s, which is exactly what led to the Republican movement getting bigger after that, or during that time. It was those kinds of repressive policies. If you're not going to kill everybody, which is clearly what the Israelis are attempting to do in Gaza right now, if you're not going to kill everybody, then these kinds of repressive tactics tend to backfire. And I appreciate all those slightly veiled requests for this song, and it's always such a pleasure to see all you rebels from Ireland on the feed there commenting. This is for Commandante Francis Hughes. He grew up on a farm in a troubled Irish land, under foreign rule and the British Crown's command. His father fought for Ireland 50 years before, but the Free State cut their losses and the English won the war. When internment without trial was the order of the day, when his brother was arrested and his friends were blown away, when he was beaten near to death, he decided, come what may, he'd throw his lot in with the Provos and he joined the IRA. In the occupied 6 counties, perhaps it never will be known, all the foreign soldiers in Armagh Tyrone who decided to head back across the Irish Sea so they wouldn't have to meet the man from south of Derry. He never wavered in his battle for Irish liberty, and the Crown would soon regret the day they made him enemy. The Brits called it bandit country, and it filled them all with fright. In the borderlands, he who walked the hills at night. Up the Provost, that's what he said. 3 little words that filled the British Crown with dread. With a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse, long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Once he was surrounded by the SAS. How he might escape was anybody's guess. In his boots and camouflage, he didn't miss a beat. He walked right past the soldiers
then out into the street. Once he came upon a checkpoint, the soldier didn't want to die. He recognized our Francis, and the soldier waved him by. He didn't want to find out if he could take what he could give. He knew there'd be a shootout, and the soldier chose to live. Up the provost, that's what he said. 3 little words that filled the British crown with dread. With a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. He was the North's most wanted man, with his photo everywhere. But he eluded capture with his wit and dyed blonde hair. For 6 years he was active, 3 times as long as most. He became a legend north to south and coast to coast. He came upon 2 soldiers out one night on patrol. They shot him in the firefight and the bullets took their toll. He crawled off into the bushes, but they found him the next day. Grabbed him by the arms and carried him away. Up the provost, that's what he said. With a shattered bone and a body full of lead. With a rifle and a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. And they tortured him and they gave him 80 years. When they brought him to the H blocks, he was greeted there with cheers. He went right on to the blanket, and when the hunger strike began, he was the first to volunteer along with Bobby Sands. He was an Irish soldier, and that's how he did his time. He knew he was no criminal, and when occupation was the crime. Bobby Sands had passed beyond us, where Francis soon would be, and although he couldn't stand and he could barely see. Up the provost, that's what he said, as they carried him to hospital to lay in his deathbed. With a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Up the provost, that's what he said. 3 little words that filled the British crown with dread. With a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes.
Somebody is asking about me coming to New York City. I could, and I might. There might be a gig in New York City on Friday. That is uncertain at this point. But where I definitely will be playing is Boston and Amherst, Massachusetts, New Haven, Connecticut, and Woodstock, New York. So if you are in or near any of those places or know anyone who is, please send them to davidrovics.com/tour, and they can find out about and come to a gig and, hopefully enjoy it. These are songs about resistance of one form or another, rather than just songs where everybody dies at the end, which is my specialty. But I was realizing today, looking at these, finding songs that were specifically about resistance that has actually had a positive impact, in my humble opinion. And I realized I've written a lot of these songs on that subject. And you have just heard a selection of them. And I will be doing many more of these concerts on the internet, specifically about songs of and about resistance. What am I calling it? Yeah, Up the Rebels series. There will be more. I don't know when, but soon. And I will leave you with a song that isn't specifically actually about a specific resistance campaign. It's more about the concept that music has an impact on fomenting and sustaining and commemorating and inspiring resistance. The Israelis are very familiar with that concept of music and art and culture inspiring resistance, which is exactly why they are destroying all the cultural institutions of Gaza one at a time. They've destroyed hundreds of UN schools, hundreds of hospitals, and museums and other cultural artifacts and statues. They're just destroying it all because they want to erase the existence of the Palestinian people. And a big part of how you do that is by destroying cultural institutions and by assassinating journalists and assassinating artists and assassinating poets. And this is something they've been specifically doing for the past few months. I've also written songs about it. And if you want to hear those songs, davidrovics.com/Palestine. You can hear them, the songs about targeting journalists and all this that I've written about. And Israel has been doing that for a long time. Israel famously killed some of the most beloved Palestinian writers and journalists and artists in the 1970s in a campaign of assassinations. It's the same thing that Germany did in Poland when they were trying to erase the Polish identity when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. And it's the same thing that has been done to the indigenous peoples of the United States, Canada, Australia, in the residential schools or the Indian schools, depending on what country. They're called different things. But those institutions were designed to do exactly the same thing, along with, of course, genocide before that of killing people in huge numbers. But the survivors who were sent to residential schools, very much like the, what they call the Israeli Arabs in a way. But Israel knows about the power of art and culture, and which is one of the things that inspires me to keep on writing these songs. Because not that I want to be assassinated, but I know it makes a difference, and it's sort of helpful to see that the trolls and UK lawyers for Israel and all these groups that are sicking their trolls on me, and trying to ruin my career. That they know how powerful music is, and I can only hope to reach a wider audience, and so that they can get even more upset. But this is a song about the concept of music and as a tool for resistance, rather than a song about a resistance activity specifically. Other than, I guess it's a song about music as a resistance activity. But the other songs in this series, I promise, will stick to specific stories, as I have done up until this point in this set. And the next one that I do, whenever that will be also specific stories of resistance. A song could bring us together across the planet that gave us birth, to act as one, bring peace and justice all around this shattered earth. If a song could take down borders, take down fences, make them fall, liberate all those in prison, kept behind the ghetto walls. If a song could stop the bombs, so the next might be the last. If a song could change the future, so it won't be like the past. If a song could be a missile fired from the Iron Dome, if it could protect the children, keep them safe
within their homes. If a song could raise an army and transport it on command, take us all to Palestine to defend the Holy Land. If a song could be concrete and put to use to rebuild, if it might turn back the clock, bring back all the babies killed. If a song could be a blueprint, instructions to show us how. If a song could change the world, then let us sing it now. If a song could bring us together across the planet that gave us birth, to act as one, bring peace and justice all around this shattered earth.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And this will be archived on the usual platforms on YouTube, Facebook, X, afterwards, and in podcast form. You can find it on Substack and Patreon and at davidrovics.com/thisweek. Very soon, I'll put it up as a podcast. It'll also be on SoundCloud and various other places. If you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Pretty much most of the platforms, you can get it there. And if you are in the Northeast U.S. or coming right up, I'll be playing in Boston, in Amherst, in New Haven, and in Woodstock. And I would love to see people out there in the Northeast, if you know anyone around there. And if you are in other parts of the world and might have any inclination to hear music like this live and organize a gig, for me, that's how I actually do this. It's all crowdfunded and crowdsourced. The gigs are crowdsourced and my survival is crowdfunded. Patreon and Substack is where you can crowdfund my survival and allow me to keep on doing this if you want to. And the other thing you can do if you are inspired is to organize a gig. So other than the Northeast coming right up, I will be on the West Coast in Oregon, doing gigs in late May. I'll be doing a tour in Australia in June and July, and California West Coast tour in August, and in November Scandinavia. And then a year from this month in March 2025, I'll be in England and hopefully also various other parts of the islands around there, like Ireland and Scotland, etc. Thanks for listening, and keep on keeping on. Yeah, free Palestine. Bye for now.